Gretel had never been a fan of stagecoach travel, and the day-long journey to Bad am See did nothing to win her over. Hans had admired what he considered the fine horses that were to power their conveyance. Gretel put this generous appraisal of them down to the fact that he was still half drunk from Starkbierfest. She herself fancied the lead animal had a mean look in its eye, and the rest were overworked and on the scrawny side. Despite spring having fully sprung, the coachman was so muffled against cold winds it was hard to determine his age or countenance. He gruffly hauled cases and boxes aboard, leaving the passengers to see to themselves. Besides Gretel and Hans, they were to have Besides Hans, Gretel was to have 3 travelling companions. There was a stout businessman who insisted on introducing himself to everyone. Beckstein's the name. Pleasure to make your acquaintances. Weather set fair for a good journey. Should make excellent time. I've a meeting in Bad at 6 prompt this evening, so delays will not be stood for, will not, he told anyone who cared to listen. Gretel did not. She preferred to travel in peace, gazing through the window at the countryside to remind herself how lucky she was not to be out in it, snacking at regular intervals to keep blood sugar and spirit up, dozing against the cushion that was her brother when the road was smooth enough to allow it. Sadly, the remaining occupants of the carriage had other ideas. "We are the Petersons," said Herr Peterson, proffering a hand that Hans felt obliged to shake. "Inge and I are touring the region." He paused to touch his wife's glowing cheek and smile at her. "We are indulging ourselves in a second honeymoon," he added. "We are so happy to be reliving such pleasant memories, such wonderful times, in such a beautiful place as this." Watching the middle-aged lovebirds made Gretel queasy. Why did people feel the need to display their cloying affection for each other in public? It was almost enough to put her off her bratwurst. Almost. Crack open the supplies, Hans. This is going to be a long day. To begin with, the landscape through which the little party rattled was of the picture postcard variety. An hour's distance from Gesternstadt saw them leave the valley and begin the climb towards the mountains. The high meadows were full of spring flowers and lush grass, dotted with fat goats and cows with coats that shone in the brightness of the day. Pine forests began to fringe the road as they travelled through the Kilmfeld Pass and emerged on the eastern side of the hills. Here drama replaced prettiness. The mountains rose so steeply even the goats had been defeated by them. Silver threads of waterfalls glinted against dark stone as they tumbled into glassy lakes. The terrain proved testing for the horses as they scrambled along the twisting stony path that traversed the side of the precipitous hill, sending dislodged rocks splashing down into the water far below. More than once Inge Peterson whimpered, causing her besotted spouse to pat her gloved hand. Even Herr Beckstein looked a little pale, his mouth set in a grimly determined line. Hans distracted himself from thoughts of possible death by taking out his hip flask. "Hair of the hound and all that," he told Gretel. When the stagecoach took a pothole at speed, making the rear wheels drop and then leap alarmingly, he passed it around and found eager takers. In an attempt to remain calm and make good use of the time, Gretel turned her mind to the case of the missing cats. The facts as she saw them were few and unhelpfully far between. 3 cats missing, all different colours and ages. The bell from the cat's collar in the clutches of the dead man at what had been Herr Hund's workshop. Bruder had been wearing a cat collar on his wrist. Agnes was sure the troll held vital information, but not the cats themselves. With a sigh, she realised she had made precisely 0 headway in her investigation. Other puzzles kept insinuating themselves into her thought process, pushing aside matters she should be dealing with. For a start, who was the mystery archer? And what had Princess Charlotte been up to? And now, curiously, there was the girl at Madame Renoir's, Joanna. There was something about her, something that stirred the mud of memory but would not quite reveal the treasure buried there. A brutal jolt as the coach negotiated further ruts in the road brought her back to the present. "Nearly there," Hans assured her. "Look!" She peered past him out of the drop-side window. Bad am See was laid out below like a toy town, set down on the shores of the sparkling lake, a picture of tranquillity and loveliness. The coachman navigated the steep descent without mishap and delivered them safely to the town square, the low light and long shadows of the late April afternoon softening the edges of the quaintly painted buildings around them. The travellers alighted, stretching their aching limbs to a chorus of clicking spines and knee joints, light with relief at having arrived unscathed, save for the damage to their bruised posteriors and frayed nerves. It didn't take long for Gretel and Hans to settle into the Bard Hotel. Gretel unpacked, enjoyed a little pre-dinner nap, and then headed for the restaurant. Hans discovered the adjacent inn was running a mini beer festival and took himself off to sample the local ales. Gretel had not entirely forgotten the original reason for spending huge amounts of money on such luxury and indulgence, and did her best to quiz as many of the hotel staff as she could concerning the whereabouts of the troll. Her questions were met with one of three responses: don't know, don't care, and don't ask me, I'm too busy. She was forced to jangle a few gold coins in her hand to get any cooperation at all, but even then she gained nothing more enlightening than one possible sighting and an earful of hearsay. She was all for giving it up for the evening and turning in when she bumped into the Petersons. "Ah, Fraulein," Herr Peterson greeted her like a long-lost friend. "How nice to see you again. Is the Bad Hotel to your liking? 'Tis over 30 years since we last stayed here, and it is still every bit as perfect as we remember. Isn't that so, Inga?" Inga nodded enthusiastically. "We are so excited about tomorrow's excursion," he went on. "Will you be joining us?" Excursion? The very word forced Gretel to stifle a yawn. "Why, yes, the hike up into the mountains on the wild flower trail. Have you not been made aware of it? Oh, how fortuitous then that we met. Just imagine, had we not, you might have missed the opportunity to discover the delights of the alpine flora on offer in Bad am See. Imagine. Did you know that there are 16 species of miniature orchid to be found in this region alone and nowhere else? I'm ashamed to say that I did not. Well, we must let you get to your bed, Herr Peterson said, stepping aside, beaming. The party departs at 6 sharp in the morning, and we must all be at our best for the steep climb. Good night to you, Fraulein." Gretel hastened away in the direction of the sanctuary of her room. Several of her least favourite words, of which hike was one of the worst, had just been lobbed at her. While experience had taught her that there were more terrible fates than flower-spotting walk in the hills, it ranked pretty high on her list of things I would die happy never having done. She puffed her way to the top of the second flight of stairs and turned into the narrow corridor that led to her room. She was more than a little surprised to spot a walrus sleeping on the floor, its head jammed beneath a leggy jardiniere. She approached it cautiously. Closer inspection revealed it to be Hans. "Hans, what are you doing?" He stirred with a moan. "Get up, for pity's sake. I didn't fork out hard-earned money for a room for you so that you could sleep in the hallway." She steadied the teetering flower pot as he struggled to extricate himself. "Hallway?" He scratched his head as he clambered to his feet, a splayed cigar still clenched between his teeth. "Fancy that. Could have sworn I got into my bed." "Well, let's be thankful you didn't see fit to undress first," said Gretel, steering him towards his door. Hans fished his key from his pocket and waved it at the lock. "Here, give it to me." Gretel took it from him, opened the door and shoved him through. "So much for a break from the inn. You might as well have stayed at home and got drunk there. Really, Hans, you're enough to drive me to drink." "You won't say that when you hear what I've found out," he insisted, hiccups underlining each word with extra importance. "Go on. Astound me." "I drank with a man who danced with a girl who knew a woman who had an aunt who lived with an old lady who had a summer cottage up on the hill above the town." "Fascinating. And how much beer did you have to buy to discover this riveting piece of local flim-flam?" "Neither flim nor flam, but good solid fact." Hans fought to free himself from his jacket, but his arms were reluctant to cooperate, so that he was soon wriggling pointlessly in the manner of someone wearing a straitjacket. "That's what you want, wasn't it? That's what you came here for? Facts, eh?" "Facts pertinent to the case I'm attempting to solve, yes. Facts concerning people of no consequence whatsoever to me or my inquiries, no." "Ah, but they are pertinent," he said. "I remain to be convinced," said Gretel. Hans made an extra effort to rid himself of his tweed bondage, but succeeded only in tipping over so that he lay face down on the bed. Gretel waited. After a while he began to snore. She gave way to exasperation and barked at him. "Hans! What? What?" Startled, he came to what senses he had left. "Facts," he repeated. Yes, facts. He lives up at the hunting lodges, way, way, way up. There's a stream and a hiking trail and a bridge. That's where you'll find him." "Find who?" Hans had slumped forward once more and was losing consciousness fast. Gretel shook him roughly. "Hans!" But he was well beyond her reach. With eyes firmly shut, his mouth at last relinquishing its grip on the mangled cigar, he emitted a single slurred word. "Troll." As she trudged along with her fellow flower spottles, I can't say that. As she trudged along with her fellow flower spotters, Gretel consoled herself with the fact that the weather at least was pleasant, which was more than could be said for the steepness of the incline, the roughness of the path, or the tiresome chatter of the Petersons et al. There was a guide who had clearly imbibed far too much coffee before setting out, and now babbled on relentlessly about this edelweiss and that violet, until Gretel wanted to push him off the nearest cliff, of which there were many. She fought for oxygen in the thin mountain air, forcing herself onward. But no matter how hard she tried, the gap between herself and the rearmost hiker was ever widening. At one point, Herr Peterson called back to her, "Fraulein, are you still with us?" Gretel was tempted to say no, but resisted. In fact, she was incapable of saying anything. It was breathe or speak. She could not do both. She raised a hand in what she hoped was a cheerful, reassuring manner. She did not want fuss and attention. Her plan was to follow the group as far as was necessary, using the guide to take her up to the level of the last hunting lodge. Then she would look for a path leading off to a stream, sneak away, and hopefully locate the troll. With luck, they would all be far too busy scrutinising some rare buttercup or other to notice her absence. Gretel's left foot dislodged a loose stone, sending it skittering down the precipitous slope. She gasped, clinging to the only bush that had sufficient temerity to grow in such a place, and gave thanks for the stout walking boots she had for once made herself wear. After a further hour of scrambling and plodding, during which time the splendour of the scenery was entirely wasted on Gretel, they did indeed pass the uppermost hunting lodge on the trail. Within a few yards she spotted a narrow track snaking off to the right, just as the main track turned sharply in the other direction. She hung back a little more, waiting until she was sure her departure would not be observed, and then scampered away. It was blissful to be going downhill for the first time that morning. Her delight at not having to haul herself upward got the better of good sense, so that she was soon charging down the track, gathering alarming momentum. If she should trip at such speed, there would be no stopping her. One wrongly placed foot, and she would be rolling all the way down to Bardamsee. Thankfully, the path began to level out, which slowed her descent, just in time for her to spot a fast-flowing stream. The path followed its banks, and soon enough crossed it by way of an old stone bridge. Gretel leaned over, peering into the darkness beneath the low arch of stone. It was too gloomy for her to see anything properly, but she fancied there was a small doorway hidden in the shadows. She crossed the bridge, left the path, and clambered down to the stream's edge. The first thing she met was the most revolting smell she had ever encountered. It seemed to consist of rotting things and putrid matter of indescribable awfulness, with high notes of sewage and yet more unknowable ingredients. Gretel whipped out a hanky and pressed it to her nose and mouth. The second thing she met was a roughly painted sign bearing a warning, "Persons entering better not." It occurred to her that Agnes's vision had been something of a bum steer, but even so, this was proof, if proof were needed, that she was in the right place. It was also evidence that the troll was of a low level of education and literacy. That he could write at all surprised Gretel, and it was only then that she realised she knew next to nothing about the creatures. Were they big or small, fearsome or harmless, friendly or dangerous? The sign seemed to suggest that callers were not welcome. Gretel squared her shoulders and patted the bags of gold coins and notes tucked into her corset, reasoning that just about everybody had his price. "Hello?" she called out. "Anyone home?" Her voice echoed eerily in the small cavern formed by the bridge. Now that her eyes had adjusted to the low light, she could see that she had been right about the doorway, and that it was blocked by a particularly stout, studded door. Risking mouthfuls of the stench, she shouted out this time, "I say hello!" She tried again, "Herr Troll, are you there?" Suddenly, a heavy shape dropped from the bridge, landing on the stony soil behind her. Gretel peered at it, but it remained a featureless silhouette, broad as a bear, against the brightness of the day beyond. It crouched low, moving its curiously misshapen head from side to side, emitting a soft, menacing growl as it did so. Gretel, who had considered herself pretty well exhausted up until this point, felt adrenaline coursing through her veins, charging her body with the wherewithal to flee. She clenched her teeth as much against the ever-increasing stink as against her own fear, and attempted to keep her voice steady. "Ah, good morning to you," she said. "I was hoping to have a word or two with you, if you're not too busy." The growl grew into a deep, gravelly voice, a voice you could hire out to infest children's nightmares and turn a reliable profit. "Troll been watching you," he said. The words carried on fetid breath. "Troll been seeing you a-tumbling and a-lumbering down the hill." The troll took a step nearer, dragging one foot as he did so, his arms hanging low, his head still turning this way and that. "Big woman," he said, somewhat unnecessarily in Gretel's opinion. "Big, big woman." "Yes, quite. Well, there it is. Now." Gretel paused to fumble for her money. She took out a small bag of coins and jangled it as attractively as she knew how. The troll showed not the slightest interest, but stepped forward in one more shambling stride. At that moment, a shaft of light fell through a hole in the bridge above and illuminated the face of the troll. It took all Gretel's willpower to quell a full-blown scream of horror. She'd seen some pretty nasty things in her time, but nothing had prepared her for the revolting visage of the troll. His skin was of a bilious green hue. His face consisted of a short, wide snout, 2 piggy eyes, a wide, dribbling mouth, and a mass of pustules and spots. 2 tusks protruded from between slack lips. The troll's hair was matted and white and stood in thick tufts on top of its fat head. His earlobes were pendulous and weighed down by what looked like chunks of ivory. He was clothed in a shapeless sheepskin garment that wriggled and glinted all of its own accord. 2-fingered hands hung at the ends of its bristly arms. A wide belt around his middle gave the poor creature some shape, but had the unfortunate effect of accentuating the bulging codpiece below it. Short, muscular legs and large, filthy feet completed the gruesome apparition. The troll stepped closer. He squinted myopically at Gretel, sniffing her up and down as he leaned terrifyingly near. "Big woman, big fat woman," he said again, his voice husky with desire. The speed with which Gretel moved surprised even her. Within the blink of a rheumy eye, she had spun on her heel and bolted out the other side of the bridge, galloping for the path as fast as her aching legs would carry her. But she was no match for the troll. In 2 bounds he had overtaken her and was blocking her way. Gretel skidded on the rubbly surface of the mountain slope and fell heavily on her backside, right at the troll's disgusting feet. "Big fat woman, stay," he growled. Then, his head almost coquettishly on one side, he added, "Big fat woman want drink?" It had been many years since Gretel had been on the receiving end of a pick-up line, but even she considered this to be a poor effort. However, given that her chances of outrunning the troll were precisely nil, and that she clearly needed time to plan her escape, a drink didn't seem like a bad idea. Gretel allowed herself to be led inside the troll's dwelling. The stench was thick enough to swallow. The single room had been hewn out of the mountain and was windowless, airless, and sticky. The troll lit 2 tallow candles and gestured for Gretel to sit on one of the small wooden stools by the smouldering fire.